All right, so now we're going to go into the pushing lifts here. So basically anything that resembles sort of a push-up, a chest press, bench press, that sort of thing. And I always start with the push-up as the foundation for this because, again, when we look at the bench press, it's going to be a very similar movement. We've just now got a bar that we have to deal with in a different load. But the mechanics of the push-up, again, there's a lot of prerequisites, very similar to the squat actually. For the upper body, we've got a lot of prerequisites we need. We need to have good wrist extension. There's that wrist extension coming into play again from the front squat that we saw, but also the push-up. Again, if they don't have that, and then they're getting loaded into that position there of at least 90 degrees, probably greater than or less than 90 degrees on that wrist extension. If they're just getting forced into it, we're going to have some wrist problems. So we'll look today at the push-up first and sort of some progressions for that. And then we'll look at the cable single arm press. And then we can basically, from the push-up position, we can understand what it looks like to do more of a chest press as well, if that is something that is needed. I need to stress this first and foremost is that none of these lifts are something that's absolutely necessary for every athlete, okay? This is very important to understand because it's completely determined by how they are moving and the structure of their body. So some athletes I will not even have do any bench press because of some either pathologies of the shoulder, or they just cannot do it without getting some impingement there. We're always working on those prerequisites, trying to get those for every lift and every movement we're trying to do, but sometimes we're just not going to have it. We're going to be wasting our time and probably keeping them injured more than not, which is, you know, obviously a concern. So especially with things like overhead, we talked about the pull-ups before and getting into that position, but also even remember a push or a press is anything here, you know, sideways push, that sort of thing. You're pushing something away from you. And any overhead press, a lot of athletes think they have to do overhead press. Absolutely not. In fact, there's a low number of athletes I'll actually have do overhead presses for a variety of reasons, but there are multiple ways of getting upper body strength and power. And we don't, another thing we need to pay attention to is that we don't need to mimic the movements that we're doing, okay? We did talk about the adaptations of deadlift into things like double pulling, but that's an adaptation. It's not something meant to mimic the actual movement. That's what the ski technique is there for. That's what your sport coaches are there for. That's your job. The job of building strength is to actually, you know, we need upper body strength and power, right? How we get that is going to be determined on that individual and the approach of the coach, okay? So with the push-up position, again, a lot of misconceptions on that. You'll see a lot of athletes say, I can do a ton of push-ups. You get them to do something well, and they can only do 5 to 6 push-ups really well. And that's because they were basically going as fast as they can, not worrying about what the spine was doing, not worrying what the shoulder was doing, and they were taking the path of least resistance, often not using a lot of muscle mass along the way. So in order to be the safest for the shoulders here, what we're looking for is, if I'm going to bring this down to the floor in a second, but from the top, I'm basically looking at my thumbs being about shoulder width apart, fingers splayed apart, middle finger straight ahead, okay? So that's going to start me off. I don't want to see the hands turning in or out. We're going to start this right from the front, straight ahead. So when I bring that down to the floor, I'm starting off with that position there, okay? So when I go into my push-up, I'm going to bring my toes right underneath me, straight back, feet together. And I'll show you this angle first. When I come down, I'm basically allowing my elbows to come at about a 45-degree angle here. Okay, so I'm here and then back up. Now if we look at the setup from the side, we're actually going to see that that shoulder is quite a ways forward of the wrist. It's actually going to be more over the fingertips, meaning that this forearm is going to be pretty much straight up and down here. And now that, again, that's meant to get maximum congruency at the ball and socket of the glenohumeral joint. So what it looks like from the side is I'm quite a bit forward of that. Okay, so I'm right over here. Come down and then back up. You see the whole body's planked. And again, we talk about those patterns. This is where those dysfunctions show up. We want to make sure that in that position, we're talking about glutes tight, so that the pelvis is not loose. And when the pelvis tilts anteriorly, we're going to have all that gravity coming down onto the lower back with not a lot of support there. So the pelvis isn't being supported, and it's going to take the spine with it, and then we're going to have gravity acting on that on top of it. So we want to make sure that we've got quads tight, glutes tight, core tight, and even again, pulling those scapula down to your opposite back pocket is a way of getting them to understand to keep those shoulders away from the ears, because when we get down to the bottom of position, we don't want to be shrugging up to press up. We want to build that stability down and press straight up. Now, in some of your athletes that don't have the strength, and this will be absolutely apparent in the female population, because upper body mass, muscle mass, is just not the same, and this is where we see the difference. A lot of our female athletes will deadlift, pull-ups, rowing just as much as our male athletes. The big difference we see is upper body pushing strength. And so again, we don't want to force people into doing hundreds of repetitions of something very bad. So building that prerequisite first is important. So if they don't have that strength off of the ground, we can use the bench. I prefer the bench to the knees, because in the knees we see a lot of breakdown still in the core. We want to teach that plank position even when we're progressing. So we'll have them on the bench, and the hands same position, feet are back here, okay? We're in a nice position here, coming down and pressing it from there. If that's still too hard, we can have the 1 foot forward and take a bit more load. And again, maybe we're not going quite as deep until we can build that strength up and go a little bit deeper. There's another way we can do this, which is to add our monster bands as well. Those big thick bands that we could tie off across something and load onto it, so that we're actually loading the band and it's helping us come up from there. And I might try and get you another video for that, but in the meantime, just start with the bench right now as a progression up, okay? And if you need to make that bench a lot higher, maybe they're starting on the wall and just getting used to that pattern of pushing themselves away, okay? So give those things a try. Lastly, one thing I wanted to show as well was the single arm cable press. So this would be very much like the single arm row, but now we're pressing away from us. When we start off, we want to make sure that I always like to go underneath, so the cable actually goes in between the rib cage and the arm, under the armpit there. So we're going to grab through here, and then two hands, we're going to press from here, we're going to press straight out, so that arm gets extended straight out and then pulls straight back. But again, we want to make sure that that shoulder's not rounding here, okay? So when we press, it's underneath the arm, straight ahead, bit of a forward lean, and you can see I stagger my stance just for a little bit of stability. And then from there, we're pressing straight out and then back in. And then when you take that back, I don't want you to let go this way, because we'll have some rotator cuff issues. We want to grab with the other hand, lift off, turn, and bring it in. And again, just another way of getting single arm pressing strength that's going to build off of the push-up, build into the things like chest press if it's necessary, and then potentially into some single arm overhead presses that can be done straight up or at an angle in like a landmine position. So give that a shot there and let me know what you think.